If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard me mention open source defense. Primarily, it's a newsletter that talks about weapons from a technology perspective, but they're much more than that. They are a venture capital fund, and they are also now a podcast. So I'm going to talk to them about what they're doing. Welcome back to another T-Rex Talk. I have a guest with me today. I've talked about open source defense on the podcast many times in the past, and very recently, Open Source Defense has started their own podcast. So as we get into that, you probably have a good idea of where we're going, or if you're new to this thing, Kareem, would you tell us a little bit about open source defense for the newcomers, all the things that you want to try to do, the different platforms that you're on? I think that would be helpful for the newcomers. And then if you're already a fan of the T-Rex podcast and you're already a fan of open source defense, you can probably skip like 30 seconds because you already know all this stuff.
Yes. And thank you for, mentioning the Substack and stuff a bunch. And thank you for being the very first guest on our podcast.
That was my pleasure. And I'm hoping that later in this podcast, you might give me a hint as to who the next guest will be, because I'm very much looking forward to this podcast. I don't have much time to listen to podcasts these days, but I have a feeling that you're going to have really neat people on the podcast. So I'm actually making time for what you guys are doing. But what is the mission? What is the goal of open source defense?
Yeah, so we are a gun rights group, and our whole thing is 100% gun rights, 0% culture war. So I think historically, a lot of gun rights groups have tried to kind of walk a fine line and moderate it in trying to tell people about gun rights in a way that pulls people in. They end up moderating their emphasis on gun rights. And we don't do that. So we are like very happily full throttle pro-gun. But we all had this, most of us came from like a tech background and all had this experience of being in the kitchen at the office in like New York or San Francisco or something, and having a coworker sidle us up to us in the kitchen, like they're doing a drug deal, being like, oh, like I heard you like to go shooting. Could you take me this weekend?
Yeah.
And just found
the
this like vast
topic. Yeah.
Exactly. We found this universe of people, this like hidden universe of people who were either gun curious or already gun owners and valued gun rights, or were at least kind of on the path to getting there. But felt like there was no group that they could hang their hat on, and more to the point, just no kind of set of arguments and set of philosophies that they could get involved with it without feeling like they're signing up for a bunch of other stuff that they're not interested in.
Yeah.
So that's where we focus. We've got the Substack comes out once a week, Twitter, Instagram, the podcast, which we just launched with you. I will blow the second guest. It's Jay Idris of Pew Science, one of my favorite new businesses in the space. Well, I guess not so new anymore, but super innovative.
He's been doing this for a while. And did you get into some of his background as a rocket scientist? Because he's been doing work in this space for a long time, and he's applying it to suppressors now, and he's part of gun culture 2.0 or 3.0, wherever we're at. So yeah, that I can already I imagine that's a fantastic episode.
Yeah. Super interesting guy. I mean, when you work as in like a blast lab for the Navy, explosions inside a gun are just small potatoes. You can do that in your sleep. So he does really cool work with Pew Science. And then we also just, our most recent thing is we launched a venture arm, OSD Capital. This is something that came out of like many years in the space where we've ended up talking to pretty much like every founder of like every cool company in the space, CEOs of big companies, founders of tiny ones, everything in between, and found that the stuff we were used to in the tech space of entrepreneurs being able to take for granted a great funding ecosystem and a great ecosystem for getting advice and hiring and talent and all of these things that, like, thank God they can take it for granted, because that creates a thriving ecosystem of great products and great technologies and moving stuff forward really fast. In the civilian defense space, that is just absent, right? Like, no access to capital, no access to expertise. And, thank God for founders, like Lucas and the whole team at T-Rex for like pushing through that. But it's difficult. And we want to build an ecosystem that allows like thousands of companies like that to get started. So that's the venture arm. We're investing basically early stage startups in civilian defense.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. Now, in many ways, it's not actually the money that is the most interesting to me. It is the networking capability that I think is huge. Maybe that's because T-Rex is already off the ground. But even for a company like T-Rex, we're old enough. We have enough time that we've learned a bunch of lessons. We have enough cash flow that I'm not really looking for investment. But even after 10 years of doing this, I feel like we could benefit so much from guys that have more experience in other types of companies or different sizes of companies. That is massive. And then I'm aware of smaller companies that maybe money is the bottleneck, and they would really like to have some experience come in alongside some money. And so yeah, I'm super excited about this angle. And the other thing is, we've talked about this in the past offline, but you come from a background in technology, in pretty advanced technological space, where as an outsider, it looks to me like there's actually a fair amount of collaboration in the tech space, even amongst competing companies. There will be core business activities that are very competitive, and then there will be other things that are extremely shared. Some technologies here or some stuff open source there, so that the entire industry as a whole can benefit. Is that just an outsider view? Is it not quite as friendly when you're on the inside?
No, that's very true. I think that's what makes the whole thing tick, right? Like, I think the most obvious example is just like open source software. But socially beyond that, just like people responding to cold emails, a lot of cross hiring, right? Like poaching is, I think in a lot of industries, they don't like it when a company poaches people from a competitor, but, and I guess for the company whose employees are leaving, that's not a fun thing, but I guess maybe the way to put it is like, high liquidity in like talent, like making it easy for talent to go to where the most promising things are, move quickly, take their experience and knowledge with them, share that widely. Like, that is what a thriving ecosystem looks like, right? Yeah. And that's very much how like the tech software space works. I think Santiago Pliego from New Founding had this great blog post titled Catechizing the Elites. And basically the premise was like, can you get the elites, right? Like whatever that means to you, to value the things you value and care about the things you care about.
Yeah.
And to not stigmatize those things. And I think that's super powerful, that if we can turn the gun space and the 2A space and civilian defense into a thing that people are proud to work on and excited to work on, there's kind of a flywheel there where like now you're pulling in like really great talent who are going to make even better products, and that builds on itself and pulls in more people.
Yeah.
So I think there is that like prestige, for lack of a better term, where like, I think the goal is like turn this into something where the smartest 18-year-olds are like, wow, I can't wait to go start a whatever company in the civilian defense space.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing, because that definitely is something that happened in Silicon Valley over the last few decades, where it became the cool place to go. And I think that there was a lot more to it than just the money is obviously a big deal. There's very good money in this space, and there's unicorns that are suddenly worth billions of dollars. Like, it definitely feels like it's the hip happening place, and it probably attracted people who might otherwise have gone to Wall Street to chase the money. But I know tons of people in the tech world where it's not about the money. It is about the accomplishment. It is about the building the new tools, building the new pieces of civilization or whatever, and being part of this Silicon Valley thing. And prestige is probably the perfect word for it. I wouldn't have necessarily called it prestigious in the way that we think of maybe academia, but no, there is a prestige to being in that tech startup space and doing things with these different folks that are cutting edge and doing stuff that is new and exciting, and that's super exciting to see. A lot of the stuff that comes out of Silicon Valley is not very exciting, but the overall vibe over the last 20 years has been interesting to me, how the excitement has been sustained of the overall big mission. And I think that is really interesting to look at. Now, there's another aspect too, which is when you do new stuff in that way, and you're in uncharted territory, you're also usually in unregulated territory. And so a lot of the unicorns are great examples of regulation dodgers. So like Airbnb is an end run around hotel regulatory systems, and Uber is an end run around taxi regulations and things. And so that is a very cool advantage to the tech space, I think. And the firearm space is fairly regulated to the point where it is harder to do some of those end runs. There's definitely people experimenting with, and have been for many years, 80% lowers and various things in additive manufacturing. But yeah, I think that we need to make the citizen defense space cooler. And we also need to lean into some stuff that is not regulated. Firearms, an individual firearm components and a few ammunition things there's a ton of stuff that's adjacent to the firearm space that is completely free to play in, like holster making. There's, once your factory's big enough, OSHA comes, they look at stuff. But for the most part, there's all kinds of freedom to develop and experiment with new stuff and accessories and lights. The FDA does want to see lasers, but lights and various other accessories that do different things so there's a lot of room to play in there.
Totally. I think also there's kind of maybe between those two, a lot of opportunity in not necessarily doing an end run around regulations, although that's great where possible, but in easing the burden. So like silencer shop is the example that comes to mind.
Perfect. Removing hurdles. You can't remove all the regulations, but getting rid of as much friction as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just did the math on this recently. I'm not spilling any like inside numbers. I have no inside knowledge. I just kind of using publicly available info. Estimated silencer shop is doing probably like $70 to $80 million in revenue. Okay, That's fairly conservative. Just based on the percentage of Form 4s in the country that are filed by them. Mm-hmm. And then, multiply by the average selling price of a suppressor. And they did that like A, bootstrapped, B, selling literally the most regulated consumer good in the country, like in US law.
Yes.
And they did it by making the Form 4 process easy, right? It would be much better if Form 4s didn't exist at all, but they built software to kind of abstract away the complexity of it as much as they can without getting a visit from the ATF. And like reaped a ton of benefits and built some really cool software and built an awesome community. So that's super cool.
Yeah. And I think that Peter Thiel would probably be a fan of this. I think it's 0 to what's his book on monopolies? Is 0 to 1?
0 to 1.
So the idea where there is this really difficult task, simplifying one of the most regulated or the most regulated item that you can purchase, simplifying that process is a giant hurdle and it's expensive. But if you do it first, then you have a monopoly. So they have a really phenomenal thing going where they have accomplished this thing of removing the friction. But it was hard enough to do that there's not a bunch of other people lining up to try and eat their lunch right now. Like it is, they did such a good job at it out of the gate. Yeah, there's probably a lot of other opportunities like that. When you are thinking about the open source defense system of capital, when you're looking at different companies or different business plans or different pitches, are you looking for people that take as big a swing as they did, or are you looking for what? Do you want to talk a little about what is an interesting pitch for you, or really fascinating place to be?
Sure. So generally, like, what is the kind of principle or goal is we want to cultivate an ecosystem where people can build things that increase individuals' capacity for self-defense. So that is what we are interested in, right? Like individuals' capacity for self-defense. I think there is defense tech generally is kind of hot right now in Silicon Valley, in venture investing. You see like major firms spinning up like American dynamism funds and saying like, yeah, we're like investing in a cruise missile company or whatever, which is fine. But that's actually a very different thing. I think those same firms that are really proud of investing in a cruise missile company would never invest in like an AR parts company.
Right. And do you think is that because there's already so much stuff happening in the AR space? Or is it because I can buy an AR and they'd rather build something that I can't have? Do you know what the reason is that the interest for cruise missiles, which I think are very scary, is higher than the interest for rifles that will go in my closet at home that I don't think are that scary?
I think there's two things at play. One is the kind of philosophical policy thing of what do firms' agreements with their investors allow them to invest in?
Gotcha. Yes.
Until recently, because, you remember they were raising money from like the California, teachers pension fund, right? These are not very adventurous, very adventurous investors. So like until recently that prohibited defense tech investing entirely. More recently that's looser, but I think generally it's for like a bunch of people who work at a pension fund in suits, like it's arming the government is a much easier pill to swallow than arming individuals.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is it's very hard to, I think it's very hard to gauge. If I were starting an AR-15 company, there's a huge market out there, but there's so many competitors. If I came up with a halfway decent competitive cruise missile, there's one customer, but I have a very good idea of what I'm dealing with. It's very different math for different groups of people. If I were the California Teachers Fund, I can kind of see where they're going. But obviously I'm not that.
Well, I mean, that goes to the second part of your question, which is not like a moral philosophical thing. It's just a math problem. And this goes to like, what are we looking to invest in kind of specifically? The reason tech investing works, the reason you can invest money in like highly speculative companies at an early stage and ever make a profit in theory is that every so often a company ends up being worth $50 billion. There are no companies in the like civilian defense space that are worth $50 billion. The whole space put together is maybe not worth $50 billion.
Right. Yeah.
And so like that is not an unsolvable problem, but what it means is you can't be quite as speculative, can't invest quite as early stage. The valuations are a little different. But generally, I think like any company that is doing something that has some ability to scale, right? Like is going to scale beyond, 10, 20% growth and just being able to support the founders and a small team, something that's going to scale like orders of magnitude, and is doing something fundamentally innovative. And what that means can vary. That could be some kind of fundamental technological breakthrough. It could be software, like one company we've invested in is called Armanet. They're just a gun-friendly ad network. So they build the same ad tools that Google and Meta make, hundreds of billions of dollars on. But Armanet allows guns. And so like the pitch is, hey, you're a gun advertiser. Do you want the same modern analytics that every single other advertiser in the world gets when they're using Google and Meta?
Right.
So like,
yeah,
that's a software product, super scalable. T-Rex as a company, like what was T-Rex's innovations? Not any kind of like fundamental technological breakthrough,
right.
but just like
very slow and steady kind of constant improvement on little bits of improvement. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. Like, super solid products, ability to market them really well, a ton of innovation, I think, for the space in branding and content marketing, and then like feeding that back into product development and building a really great cycle there. Other company like Scalarworks is like not software, not, I think like the thing that stands out there is just like, okay, like Phil at Scalarworks just like invented a really cool, effective new way to mount optics to a gun.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So like, I think it's hard to give a one size fits all, but generally like the companies that are most exciting are the companies that are doing something kind of fundamentally innovative, and have a potential of scaling that meaningfully.
So here's another question for you. I agree that the citizen defense industry should be bigger than $50 billion. It's not an unsolvable problem. And there's probably two ways that you could grow the citizen defense industry. One is you just get more regular citizens interested in buying the stuff that they can already buy, which is Glocks, AR-15s, and eventually they figure out that they can buy suppressors. The other way to do it is to expand what it is that they are allowed to buy so that there are certain things that suddenly become available. And that might be changing regulations, or it might be saying drones are no longer just for YouTube video, establishing shots. Drones are now for basic surveillance and detection. We're gonna let you do the same stuff that giant factories are doing with their autonomous drones. We're gonna let you do that for neighborhood watch. That is another way that you could expand that. So my theory is that the way that you expand this is both. You have companies like T-Rex that are working on reaching individual people and getting them equipped with stuff that's already on the table. Now we are doing a little bit of political lobbying, but I'm also very excited about people who come the other way, people who are building drone technology and saying, hey, if this is good enough for patrolling the outside of Amazon warehouses or Texas oil refineries, it's good enough for patrolling neighborhoods. And the neighborhood watch guys can actually pool their resources and buy one of these things. I think it happens from both sides. And I'd love to know what your thoughts on this. What's going to be the most effective or the most fruitful, or where we need the most work to get done?
I think you nailed it.
Well, we have talked about this before, so that's kind of cheating.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of innovation is like you don't really know where it's going to go, because if you did, you would build it. And like, as soon as someone figures out what to build, they build it and it goes great. I think the thing to think about is like platforms, where like ARs are an example of a platform that spawned a ton of innovation on top of that, in terms of like lights, optic mounts, furniture, whatever. So like, what are future platforms? So think about like the iPhone was a platform. If the iPhone launched in 2007, if someone described Instagram to you, you'd be like, okay, that's cool. It's like a thing to share photos with my friends. I guess that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You would not have predicted that like Instagram would itself become a platform upon which multi-billion-dollar companies' entire existence is based, because that's how they spread their message and market and so on.
Yeah.
So like, I think drones are a really good example of like, what are kind of fundamental technological platforms that then allow people to go build stuff that we have no idea what it's going to be, but they're going to build it and it's going to be really cool and unlock these use cases of okay, the police response time in my city is half an hour and that really sucks. But like, maybe that matters less in a world where I have like a neighborhood watch with a drone as a first responder. And
Right,
like we can
yeah.
start to solve those problems without waiting for, some central authority to solve them for us.
Yes, yeah. And I think that that is where a lot of this boils down to. The citizen defense industry problem is not necessarily one of technology or market saturation or market cap. I think it is more of getting people to understand a decentralization problem, because I do not like the idea of a central authority putting a drone in my neighborhood, but I do like the idea of people that I trust putting a drone in my neighborhood. A drone in my neighborhood is a fantastic way to do neighborhood watch type activities. But a central authority putting a drone in my neighborhood is a terrible idea, even though they claim to have my best interests at heart. For some reason, I might be skeptical. So I think that the decentralization is a thing to work on. And so I believe that the citizen defense industry will have strange allies, because there will be people who are decentralizing and building resiliency and various things inside of theoretically Web 3.0 and various federated communication platforms that are doing the work that the citizen defense industry and even the firearm industry requires to be done, even though we're not necessarily on the same page in other ways or necessarily aware of the same stuff that we're doing. This push to decentralize, I think, benefits a whole bunch of different people in a whole bunch of different ways.
Totally. And they may use those technologies in ways you don't like, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the nature of decentralization.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's super interesting.
And just trying a bunch of stuff. Some of the stuff is sort of experimental. So a number of people have asked me this. Not a number. A small number of people have asked me this. Open source defense. They're like, I understand why you like the tech side because you're a huge nerd. And I'm like, yes, I am. They say, but they're very anti-culture war, and T-Rex is like neck deep in the culture war. Like we're up to our eyeballs in culture war rhetoric all the time. I actually appreciate that we are trying to do both. That there's a bunch of guys in open source defense that are doing decentralization and talking about expanding the ability of people to defend themselves without this stuff that I think is attached. But I'm not so dogmatic that I think everybody has to attach everything to it all the time. So I actually really appreciate that there are a number of people who are trying a number of approaches on these things, and that we can be allies, even though we have slightly different business models. And so that's, and if anyone was curious, that is why I'm a fan. And we have so many shared goals and so many things that we need to accomplish. I really appreciate the different approaches.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
So what are some of the other things that you're excited about? Speaking of not getting into the culture war, we may or may not have had a really important election recently. It's another thing the internet can't quite agree on, is how important it was and in which ways. How does that change things for what you were trying to do? Obviously, the stock market rallied tremendously after the news of the outcome of the presidential election. So VC firms and funds and tech companies are relatively positive in general. But what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to pretend like I'm a macroeconomic expert or even an experienced investor. Like, we're
those guys don't know what's going on either, but
yeah, exactly. But I think, I don't know, generally for stuff like this, I think that it's never as big as people think it's going to be. Right. So if you remember, on the gun stuff, for example, when Trump was elected in 2016, there were all sorts of visions about what was going to happen for guns.
Right. Yeah.
There was I think it was the deputy director of the ATF wrote this incredible white paper in early 2017. It was as if you or I had been appointed to the ATF and told to write a paper with a wish list of what they should do. And then none of those things happened.
Right. Yeah.
So I think zooming out generally, like economically, gun wise, what are the big themes? My gut sense is whatever the effects are going to be, it's probably less than people think.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be nothing, right? So I think, we were talking a little earlier, we'll see what happens on guns. There's a ton of stuff a president can do unilaterally to enhance gun rights. And basically what that boils down to is repealing previous executive orders that restricted gun rights. But there are a ton of those. So we'll see. Yeah. I think that's just going to be a function of, like, does the Trump administration prioritize it? Do they care? Does other stuff happen that distracts them? So we'll see on that.
There might be other stuff. Yeah, it's possible that other stuff will come up.
There might be one or two other things that they jump on. So we'll see. I think, if they choose to prioritize gun rights, which is an if. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that they will choose to prioritize it. But if they do, there is a lot that a president can do, even leaving aside what Congress wants to do and what the Supreme Court does.
Yeah.
I think we've written a bunch in the newsletter about the administrative state. It's kind of funny we talk a lot about the ATF and yay, this person got elected president and we hope they do this to the ATF, and oh no, this person got elected president and the ATF is going to be terrible. So we talk a lot about what the ATF should do or should not do. But the real discussion is the fact that the ATF can do these things, the fact that it even matters is that's the real story. And, we'll see again, I think this was something that was high on Trump's talking points last time and not as much in the actions, but rolling back the administrative state is theoretically something that could have a big impact on gun rights generally and kind of adjacent issues.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that Trump's biggest impact on guns directly will probably be stuff he does indirectly. If he does manages to take on the bureaucracy, I think that the ATF will come into the crosshairs, not so much because of gun freedom, but because the ATF as a bureaucratic institution is not huge, but it would be in anybody's crosshairs. They have a very large budget, and then they have the ability to go and get money by running certain types of operations. Anybody who's doing a cleanup operation will stumble across the ATF very early in their list of people who get a lot of money, and a lot of question marks come out of the budget. So I think that is likely to happen. But if there is, real battle with the Leviathan, all of the decentralization, I think, benefits innovation and technology and the ideas that sort of undergird the citizen defense industry and the citizen defense mindset. So I am cautiously optimistic in that respect. There have been presidents who wanted to do stuff to the large Leviathan, and they didn't stay in office very long. So I'm not making any predictions. I'm just saying it's a Herculean task. There's 24 million government employees, and then all kinds of indirect government contractors floating around. And there's, not that many people that Trump will appoint. So they'll have their work cut out for them. Fortunately, it sounds like Thomas Massie is one of them. So Thomas Massie is somebody who's going to be focused on FDA and agriculture stuff, but he's also a gun lover. He's also a principal guy. So who knows? It could be really interesting. And if we could get lasers off of the FDA thing, then somebody should start making better weapon lasers, infrared lasers for night vision stuff. It's kind of all connected. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I would say cautiously optimistic, and ultimately a lot of stuff indirectly will probably connect to stuff related to this. And, even on the left, I'm seeing a lot of people on Democratic Twitter saying that the time has come for them to go stock up on guns and ammo. So maybe maybe that's going to happen too. We'll see. I'm very curious about our Black Friday sale this year, what it actually looks like, what people actually want to buy and how much and so forth.
Yeah. How many?
I've never been more uncertain about which way it's going to go. So,
okay. Yeah. I'm curious if you'll have a spike in sales to like New York and California.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Or how many people are just like, hey, stock market's up $1.2 trillion. Trump's in office. Let's celebrate.
Yeah.
Let's buy a whole bunch of stuff and go out to the shooting range. Who knows? Well, so people right now seem economically happy, but I think that that's going to translate to a lot of business stuff. I think that talk about tariffs has gotten a lot of people thinking about manufacturing, onshoring manufacturing. So tool making companies, electronics manufacturer companies, very interested in investing in American space, moving stuff to America. How much of that do you think will affect what you guys are doing in open source defense on the fund side? Are there electronics companies that you're looking at, or stuff that's happening in that space that you think might be intriguing?
We'll see. I think it's too early to tell the effects that kind of stuff is going to have, just because that's so upstream of, actual products in customers' hands, that even if there was a major change today, I think that would take a few years to show up in like actual startups and actual companies. I think that's too early to tell. I think generally one thing I've seen just in the like kind of general tech startup space outside guns is less scrutiny around acquisitions and less FTC emphasis on antitrust stuff is a good thing for the startup space, because, if you can be confident that the FTC is going to prevent your company from being acquired, that reduces the expected value of the company, right? It's just like one less exit path, one less option. So I think that's a good thing for startups, but we'll see. It's just very early.
Yeah. There's on the one hand, we've just been talking about how huge the administrative state is, but on the other hand, the economy, despite being big and having all these companies in it, there are so many connections and links, and there are things like you just mentioned. If we change the way that mergers and acquisitions work, it affects every type of company. If we change the way that certain financial or money things work, it affects every company. If we change the way that we do tariffs, it affects all the manufacturing companies and probably all the retail companies. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to watch. Now, you personally are more in the financial space. Could you talk about what some people in the financial space are saying based on this? Because tech bros are always confident that they can invent a new unicorn at the drop of a hat if they need to, and they just will. Financial people are a little more, I don't know. I'm trying to find a good, compelling, but also complimentary adjective. What are financial people saying? Yeah.
I don't know. Not much yet. Again, it's just like very early.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody really knows what to expect. I think generally, like the sense, like I said earlier, I think generally in tech, like if the regulatory state is going to be more friendly to acquisitions, more friendly to stuff like crypto, prediction markets in general, those are all good things. But again, like it's so early, and to your point, the government, how many employees are there? You probably know how many employees the federal government has.
I forget how many federal, because it's spread out and it's complicated, because you have there's 12 million teachers. They're all employed in local schools, but so much of the money comes from the government, and the administrators in the schools, they get money direct from Department of Education. So it's very fuzzy. It's very fuzzy to say who's federal and who's state and who's local, because there's just very tangled web.
Okay. Well, even that's tough to disentangle, but even like very conservatively, just number of people in the country getting a paycheck from like the U.S. Treasury or whoever signs the checks.
Yeah.
Probably like 1 million people, I think. So if you think of the president as the CEO of a 1 million person corporation, it doesn't really matter what that one person at the top thinks. If they have like lieutenants 2 levels down who don't want to do the thing they want to do, the thing isn't happening, right? Like it's not magic that the person at the top can just wave a magic wand and then everyone just does what they want.
Right.
So I think like there is a big gulf between A, what Trump says he's going to do, and then B, is actually going to want to do. But then even with what he wants to do, like the gulf from what he wants to do to actually making that happen, that's the hard part, right? Like the hard part is not saying that you want to roll back the administrative state. The hard part is actually doing it, which is like a genuine organization design challenge that probably very few people in the world are capable of solving. Elon Musk is probably one of the few people in the world who's capable of solving it at that scale. So, that's good. But we'll see. I don't know. It's just, it's so early.
Yeah. And it's a very big, complicated problem. The other issue is there are some hurdles. The other thing that I haven't really heard people talking about, obviously the opinions on Elon Musk are mixed. They're even more mixed recently now that he's supported Donald Trump, but he's very good at certain things and he has a good understanding. Twitter, changing Twitter to X is a good example of some of his organizational capabilities. But there's another thing I haven't heard too many people talk about, which is Tesla and SpaceX, and to a lesser extent, Starlink. These are software and hardware companies, yes. They're engineering innovation companies, yes. But they're also companies that require a heavy regulatory understanding and lobbying ability. The ability for something like the Cybertruck to get built is partly a hardware problem, partly a software problem, and partly a legal problem. They had to lobby the DOT for all kinds of permissions and get rules changed so that thing could be on the road with its drive-by-wire. So one of the things that Elon Musk has at his disposal, in addition to some experience with giant organizations and efficiency and so forth, he has many, 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 many lawyers who have been fighting government bureaucrats over rules and regulations for a very long time. I think that's a pretty big deal. I haven't really heard much conversation about that, but that is an incredibly valuable asset. Even if you never use those guys for anything, you just pick their brains about what they've learned about how the Department of Transportation works. It makes him a very valuable player in this space. So yeah, I'm intrigued. The way that this has come together, I don't actually believe that Donald Trump has been playing the most masterful 5D chess game of all time, and this is exactly where he wanted everything to go. But he has pulled some stuff together. There's a bunch of things that are now on the board that are really interesting. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. Yeah. And there's a lot of opportunities there for people who are in this more innovative space and will benefit for some, at the very least, conversation around decentralization will be good. Even in some ways, even if they fail to downsize the bureaucracy at all, the conversation around it, and maybe even the fact that it is impossible for them to downsize it, will be a good conversation and change people's minds about stuff.
Yeah, very true.
So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm curious. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to? I guess you can't talk about too many projects. ArmaNet is interesting because ArmaNet, like you said, it takes something that the tech companies have made standard. I am just barely old enough to remember how marketing worked pre-internet. And you had almost no feedback. You would do A/B tests with study groups, and you would do polls, and you would buy Nielsen rating reports on different things. But the actual understanding of whether or not your ad was working whether or not it was actually worth running a detergent ad in this particular magazine or on this particular TV show in a primetime slot. It was so much guesswork. And now people are really expecting and building super tight business plans around the nth, the 100th of a percent of a return on this particular ad campaign based on the understanding that they will have analytics. They will know exactly what the conversion rate is, and they will know exactly how many eyeballs and so forth. It's really fascinating to me that that's where advertising has come after being such an inexact science for the rest of its history.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I think it's a good example of an opportunity that has just been kind of left by the wayside by the big companies. Mm-hmm. And I think, one of my co-founders at OSD, Chuck Rossi, worked at Facebook for 11 years and speaks eloquently about this, that like we were talking earlier about the size of this industry. It's the biggest companies are worth like maybe a couple $2 billion. That is, I think, the amount of profit that Facebook makes in a week. So yeah. It's almost, I think,
mostly through their advertising.
Yeah,
this is not a small part of their business model. Yeah,
exactly. And so I think, like, on the deplatforming stuff, we often ascribe like malice to these big platforms. We're like, oh, they're like out to get guns or out to get whatever. And the truth is actually worse. The truth is they don't even care. Like the truth is they like
it's more trouble than it's worth.
Exactly. Yeah. Like this is like a bug, and it's easier to squash the bug than to like take a step to the side and go around it. It's just more trouble than it's worth. And there's almost like at some level, it's kind of rational where if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you're saying, and like, I don't know, ISIS is like selling RPGs on your platform, which is like literally a thing, or like, posting beheading videos, like live streams of whatever to your platform. That is a thing that happens. And it is easier to say, okay, rather than jeopardize this like golden goose, just get rid of all of it. I never want to hear about any of this stuff again. That is an easier choice for a company like that to make than to make the difficult, more principled decision of, okay, we're going to really like do the work and pay the money and go to the trouble of teasing apart the users we can actually have from the users we can't, and so on.
Yeah.
For sure. Like circle back to Armanet. That is a really good example of the types of really big opportunities that, are the like proverbial $1 billion bill just laying on the sidewalk, because if you're a $500 billion company, you might not be bothered to pick that up.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see, because it's a little bit like the silencer shop example. Like, it is a big hurdle to build ad tech because all the big successful ad tech has already been built. You have to find an underserved or unserved market to make it worth your while to build it, because nobody would build a new advertising platform to compete directly with Google at this point. You would build one to find an unserved market where there isn't the competition. And so, how is that going? Can you talk about how, any stats or figures, because they're running ads currently? Is it still kind of early days, or are things, are we in full production at this point?
Yeah, no, they're running. We invested in them a year ago. They've grown a ton since then. They have tons of major advertisers, like all the big gun companies advertise with them. They're going gangbusters.
Yeah. I don't think we're running any ads with them at the moment, but we certainly have. So
okay. This is not intended as a sales pitch, but I can connect you if you want to.
Oh, yes. Well, we have run some ads with them in the past. So we actually provided, in the interest of full disclosure, we ran some ads with them pretty early on when it was not a beta program, but it felt like it was early adopters only kind of space. And we provided some input and had some good conversations. I think some good helpful conversations that everybody appreciated. So I will have to double check and see if we're running ads at the current moment, at the time of the recording. But it has been really encouraging to see the growth and to start to see the stuff show up a while. And there is this, with early adopters, with a new technology, there is this very interesting pitch that you have to make where it's like, if I get on Google AdWords, I have access to basically every human being on the planet. If I would like to show ads to people, I get everybody. And if I get on ArmaNet, well, an early adopter on ArmaNet is great, but I have access to not everybody on the face of the earth. I have access to just the people who read Ian McCollum's website. And is that worth it? So there is this very interesting thing where you got to find the advertisers and you got to find the platforms and you got to find the audience. And you got to do that relatively quickly. So yeah, I'm super glad that you guys are involved because this is the perfect project for somebody that understands the tech world and what's actually involved in building ad tech, and somebody that understands the firearm world and the audience that exists there. So it is another one of those things where this is an unserved market, but it also takes just the right people to do it. Not anybody just randomly off the street could do this thing. It takes a pretty special kind of person that has a foot in each camp.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think it's very much like uniquely at that intersection of, tech, guns. There just aren't that many people in the world who are at that intersection. I think like other exciting stuff, like we were saying earlier, just interesting platforms. I think drones, generally this whole thing of the advancement of kind of high-end military technology that like Anduril and companies like that are building. There was this evolution, I think, where in the past, military technology was always better than civilian tech. Right. Like the communication devices in Mission Impossible back in the day were way better than what you could buy.
Yeah.
I remember there was this very silly thing where like in Casino Royale, 2006, the first Daniel Craig James Bond, he had this Sony cell phone and it was like so cool. And it could do like location track. It was like tracking where the bad guy was. And I was watching the movie and I had an iPhone and I was like, this phone is way better than what James Bond has. And it was like a year later.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think like over the past maybe 15, 20 years, it flipped where, I mean, I'm sure there's cool stuff we don't know about, but like military
Generally
technology is just not that great. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
and the projects, there's this gentleman, Steve Blanks at Stanford University, has talked about this a bit. He runs something called the Gordian Knot Center. I forget what it's called. The Gordian Knot Center for Defense Innovation, something like that. And it specifically is for big government level tech. But they've run studies, and your average government development program, your average military contract, is a 9 to 26 years long project from conception to delivery. And in the tech world, like that's not a thing. You can't work on a project for 26 years. Silicon Valley is only just now getting to be like 26 years old. Like you need to bring out a new product every 26 days.
Exactly.
So it's a very different mentality that is kind of set in within the military industrial complex. And the citizen defense industry has to have a very different mindset. And so it is really cool to see what Anduril is doing. And Anduril is doing some stuff that there's no reason that I even couldn't buy their stuff. One of the most fascinating products that they have right now that I want the most doesn't have any explosives attached to it. It doesn't even fly. It is their software-defined radio and antenna package that just records radio data and just analyzes it and has a really clever machine learning component that just tries to figure out the RF radio space and tell you what's going on in it. Where are radios? What are they doing? Is there stuff going on? Are there drones that I should be aware of? I've been tinkering with this technology for a while, and I just want to buy one of those things and put it on the top of my house, on the top of my car, or over here at T-Rex, and just kind of have an idea of what's going on. Like, oh, there's a whole bunch of people using GMRS radios nearby. I wonder if there's an emergency. I will listen in. This is super basic stuff that anybody could do and buy and have. There's no reason that I shouldn't be able to just go on the Anduril website and add to cart. So, maybe we'll get there.
I hope so.
There's plenty of stuff on there that I want that you can't add to cart without the licenses and user certificates, so forth. But some of the radio stuff, I'd love to see that just be a little more available. Like Palmer Luckey is currently selling it's a retro Game Boy device, and then he has all this other stuff up here. Like I'd love to see him make some stuff right in the middle. I think that would be sweet. So it's fun to watch that space and to watch the new generation of folks talking about it, because the younger generation that is a little bit more tech adept in some ways, much more interested in guns in some ways. Like there's, thanks to video games and movies, I talk to a lot of folks who are a little bit younger than me, and they're just like, oh yeah, this would be the idea of working in the defense space as an engineer is a little bit more interesting to them, I think, than the previous generation. A little more accessible. There's a cool factor to it. So yeah, and accessibility too, I think.
Totally. Yeah. I think like Anduril for civilians, Anduril, but for me, not for the government. That's like, that would be a company we're really excited about. I think like that has kind of flipped in the past couple of years, where it feels like military technology is now pulling ahead again of what's available to civilians. And obviously like it has always been ahead in some ways, but on the software side and the drones and all that, like what you see in Ukraine. So I think, I wrote an edition of the OSD newsletter about this recently, that like, I think that is a hard thing to navigate when we talk about dangerous or powerful technologies being available to the government. And, the idea of like a police drone that can fly around and be the first responder is like cool technologically, but also makes me nervous. As like, I don't know that I want police drones flying around my neighborhood surveilling me all the time. But like, that is it's actually a difficult question to navigate. Like if the temptation is to be like, okay, no new technology for the police or something like that. Yeah. But that's not workable, right? Like at one point cars were new technology.
The only solution is to see this need and see this new technology and fill the need really well, and then do it the right way. Because if you don't do it the right way, somebody will come along and do it the wrong way. They'll say like, the cost benefit analysis here says that we need to patrol neighborhoods with drones, and it's just idiotic not to do it. If somebody makes that case and you and I aren't doing that in our neighborhoods, then somebody else will. It's much better to be able to go to the government and say, nope, we have taken responsibility here, and we already have the patrols, and we already have the, it launches from Dave's house because he had the flat roof. And then we also have backups over at Steve's house because he had the good basement. So that's where the server rack is. So like we're set. We figured this out, and I trust those guys more than I trust you. So we're good.
Exactly. I think like we have to get there first, basically. There's a jiu-jitsu instructor called Kurt Osiender who has one of his catchphrases on YouTube is when people ask like, how do I get out of this choke? Or how do I, get out of this hold? He says, if you're in that position, you messed up a long time ago. He doesn't say messed up. I don't know if this is a family-friendly podcast. I won't say what he really said.
We try to keep it family-friendly, yeah. And this ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure thing is a very big deal when you talk about weapons, technology, or the government, and we're talking about all three.
Totally. And I think it's particularly acute now in the like drone surveillance space. It's what we've seen like modern militaries are capable of, and like that has been demonstrated in the field for the first time just in the past couple of years. And it's like super advanced. And imagining that being available here without regular people having an answer or having gotten there first, in terms of capabilities to take care of yourself and take care of your neighborhood and all that. We definitely don't want to be on the wrong side of the tech curve there.
Yeah. Now, not to like poke at you a little bit, but there is a cultural component. If you don't trust your neighbors, then you don't actually want Neighborhood Watch to control the drone. So there's an inescapable component here, I think, which is there's more than just the technology. But what I really appreciate about you guys and a bunch of other folks is you can't really do all the things at once. So I love the fact that you're focusing on some specific areas, really giving that a lot of attention. And there is just so much work to do in this space and in all the stuff adjacent to this space that we need a bunch of people to weigh in here, and we probably don't need as many people philosophizing on podcasts as we already have. We actually need more people who are just dialed in and doing the work. That being said, your podcast that talks to some of those people is going to be great, because I can't wait to hear from folks who are doing this stuff and doing the tinkering and doing the experimenting, and figuring out the financial side behind it. Because it's really easy for me to invent a drone on a podcast and then not know how to physically make it, or talk about how people need to have these things in their neighborhoods and not build a business model that allows them to actually afford them. Yeah. So I love that you're making that happen. And I'm anticipating that your podcast is going to be that stuff. It's going to be better than this podcast, which is mostly pontificating and,
no, that's impossible. Nothing could be better. This is, I'll retire if that happens. Not T-Rex. I can't wait. Cause the other thing is, you guys, you just have access to so many fascinating people that I want to meet and get to know and hear from. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, this is a great example of why we need multiple people to do stuff and not just put all our eggs in one basket. Is I really want to hear from your network. I'm super grateful that you like hearing from my network. It's fun when we have shared friends and the networks overlap and you talk to Jay about stuff. But the networking needs to just keep happening, and the diversification and the decentralization needs to keep happening. And I guarantee there's people that are not going to love this podcast because of various guests that I have on, and they're going to love your podcast because of the guests that you have on. And so I can't wait. Much as I never listen to podcasts anymore. I'm serious. I'm going to listen to your podcast. I didn't listen to the first episode, but I am definitely listening to the second episode. Well, thank you for making an exception.
It's mostly just making the time. So thank you so much, Kareem, for the work that you're doing. And the rest of the guys at Open Source Defense, we appreciate them a lot. And thank you so much for coming on this show. We've had Chuck on the show a while ago. So it's great to talk to you now publicly, and it's great that you're doing a podcast. And I'm excited about so many different aspects of the work, and the fact that there's different people doing the work in different ways, because a lot of problems to solve. And is there anything else that you want to close out with or tell people about that they can follow up? We'll put links in the description for the main website, Substack, and podcast stuff. Anything else that we should tell people about?
That's it. Yeah, opensourcedefense.com. There you can find the newsletter, information on the fund. If you're like starting a company in this space, if you're an investor in this space and just want to trade notes, we'd love to talk to you too. Twitter or X, it will always be Twitter to me. Yeah, that's it.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, being on the show, and even being willing to talk a little bit about politics, despite the fact that it's too early.
Anytime.